is Kirsten, and thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Relocate Podcast. So, today I have a lovely lady. She is located in Morocco, originally from the great state of Minnesota. She's actually been in, she actually lived in multiple cities in the US, actually. She's been in Illinois. She has experience living in Colorado. She eventually relocated to multiple countries. Well, not relocated, but she's had time in France, visiting France, study abroad, eventually made her way over to Morocco and lived in multiple cities in Morocco, Poland as well, ventured there. But right now she's stationed in Morocco. She's been in that country for about 5 years, and she is going to share everything that she's been experiencing. Also, just kind of like what motivated her to ultimately make that leap. So, everyone who is tuned in, we have Laura. Yay. How are you
Thank
today?
you. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Oh, I also failed to mention, oh my gosh, Laura right now, she is a freelance writer. Check out thecandidconnection.com for everything that she has there as far as freelance writing. Um, she is a part-time teacher, and she does tutoring as well. So you might want
Yeah.
to tune in. She might give you some great tips and just like background information about that. And then if you want more information, just in general about her experience as a writer, please connect with her on her social. I'll have all the information in the bio of this episode or the description of this episode where you can, reach out to Laura and speak to her more. So, all right, let's get started. I mentioned that you're originally from Minnesota.
hmm
That's a place I've never been. I know you spent like the early, like childhood, like first
Yep.
10 years or so there, and then you
hmm
moved to, was it Chicago?
Chicago suburbs. Yep.
Chicago, okay, suburbs, and then made your way over to Colorado. So you've moved quite a bit, even
hmm
before you left the US. Um, my early thoughts, I'm wondering how that shift and having to kind of uproot multiple times throughout your childhood
hmm
influence your decision to ultimately take that leap. Would you mind touching bases on that?
Yeah. So I was born in Minnesota in the Twin Cities, lived in the suburbs there for about 10 years. And then my dad got a new job. And so our family decided to relocate to the Chicago area, partially for his job and partially just to be close to extended family as well, because we had some extended family in that area and in Michigan. And we were just a bit farther away from them in Minnesota. And so that initial move, actually, from what I remember, was super hard on me. I was 10 in school. I think I was in the fourth grade. And it was kind of like leaving everything I'd ever known at that time. And I think just being so young, I remember having a bit of a difficult time processing that and just kind of adjusting to having to leave that behind and start over in a new school. It's never super easy to do when you're a kid and it feels like everyone else kind of has those existing friendships and groups. So I remember that was difficult. But then when I moved to Colorado, which was about 8 years later, I got into a university there and I had decided to move there to pursue my undergraduate degree. That transition actually felt really easy. I think at that point, I was ready for something new. I'd lived my whole life in the Midwest. No offense to the Midwest, but it is a bit boring, especially in the suburbs. There's just not a lot to do. And I had done a road trip actually with my mom and my grandma and brother a couple years prior, and we'd gone out to Colorado. And I remember just seeing the mountains for the first time and being completely in awe. Like I known that they existed, but I had never seen something like that quite up close. And so Colorado, kind of from that point on, just really felt incredible to me. I loved the mountains. I love that surrounding nature. I was really excited about the possibility of moving somewhere new. And so I would say almost that first initial childhood move from Minnesota to Illinois helped me maybe just become more adaptable, have that mindset of being able to be more flexible, more open to change after having done it once at such a young age. But then when I did it for the second time, it felt exciting and it felt much easier that time around. Maybe partially because it was my decision. I could choose where I was going to school. If I wanted to stay closer to home, I could have, but I wanted to try something new. So then that move to Colorado was, I just remember being like excited about it, being ready to start somewhere else, to have that experience of living away from home for the first time, of being on campus, being in that new environment.
Um, it's something about the mountains and
Uh-huh.
just being in that space that's so majestic. And I can't quite put my finger on it because I've seen mountains before. I've been to California and had a opportunity to see mountains, traveling upstate California, and it's just something about Colorado. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
yeah, it's beautiful. And you studied abroad too. That's an experience that I wish I could have had. I never had the opportunity to experience life outside of the US until adulthood, like post college.
Mhm.
um, how did trip the trip that you made to France, first of all, how long were you there? And how did that trip inspire you to seek life outside of the US?
Yeah, so it was a semester, I think about 4 months during the spring of my sophomore year of college. And
Okay.
I'd studied French like in middle school and high school when we had to pick a foreign language. I picked French, so I kind of had that French background. I'd taken a couple classes in college. And so when I started to hear about study abroad opportunities, I figured it would be a good place to go to continue to practice the language that I had been learning and be exposed to that culture that I was at least somewhat familiar with from the classes that I'd taken. And that was my first time ever leaving the US. Growing up, we'd done a lot of road trips, spent a lot of time like in between, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, done a few other road trips like out east, out west, but I'd never been to another country. And I will always remember that first morning. I landed in France and I'm super tired, jet lagged for the first time. I overpacked. And so I had like this massive, massive suitcase that was way too overweight that I'm like dragging with me, like can barely lift it up the stairs. A lot of the buildings in France don't have elevators. So I'm like carrying this huge bag up the stairs, barely able to pull it up. But I remember just being so amazed at everything around me. Like everything felt so different in a really exciting way. Just looking at like the architecture of the buildings, the cars, hearing that foreign language around me, it was all so new and so exciting. And I think that was the first experience and like the first day of that whole semester. And those feelings just stuck with me. I felt like every day in France was something new in a way that was actually very energizing, like learning new words, practicing the language, trying new foods, meeting people, just experiencing a very different way of life than what I'd been used to in the US. And there were some parts of it that were difficult for sure, but for the most part, it just felt exciting. And I think I'm the kind of person that really thrives off of new experiences and just kind of having that feeling of like discovery of something that I'm learning or something that I haven't experienced before gives me a lot of energy and makes me want to keep doing that. And so those just really characterized the months that I had in France. And I was living with a host family as well, which gave a good insight to like the local culture. Also, even just that feeling of kind of having a family, a home away from home, of somebody that was there to take care of me and feed me and be there to just answer questions I had and also be able to practice that language was a really cool experience that I think would have been different if I'd just been like living in an apartment or living with, other American roommates or something. And so that whole experience just really ignited a love for travel. And also, even though I was with a group and with a study abroad program, I was able to do some solo travel during that time. So that feeling of being able to go discover something on my own and kind of find that joy in solo traveling was something that I never fully done, and a feeling that I just loved. And so I came back from that semester like really not wanting to leave. I wish there was a way I could have stayed in France, but I had to finish my degree, had to get back to, family and back to campus and kind of carry out those 2 years. But after I came back, that whole time I was just thinking like, how can I do this again? How can I continue to have these experiences? And then that's what eventually led me to actually start looking for more permanent jobs or opportunities abroad post graduation.
How difficult, if there was any difficulty, was
Uh-huh.
it to even um like it took me a while to get accustomed to Spanish, but French, I know like keywords just like we and
Yeah.
I think that's about it. Okay, that might be it. That might be the only word I know. But um in the time that you were there, and I know you said you took classes, but it's one thing to take classes, and then it's another experience
Yeah.
to actually be immersed in speaking the language around people who, that's their first language, and they're gonna speak like that conversational like flow that might be a little fast paced for some people. How
Mhm.
was that experience of learning the language and then applying what you learned while you were in France?
Yeah, in the first month, it was really hard. I thought that I had a higher level of French coming in than I actually did because I'd taken so many years of classes. And I had some really great French teachers and like generally enjoyed those classes and got a lot out of them. But I underestimated how hard it is to communicate with native speakers and just like how fast they talk, some of the words, the expressions they used. And so I think I went in thinking I speak French, I'm fine. And then I got to France and I couldn't understand people because everybody talked too fast and people couldn't understand me, because I had a very strong American accent and pronunciation. And so those first, like, I would say 3, 4 weeks were definitely hard because I was realizing I did not have the level that I thought I did. Um, but what helps is that I think just full immersion. Like I was really thrown into it. My host mom did not speak a word of English. So I was forced to use French in a new way. Whereas, like, in my classes in the US, if I didn't know a word, if I was struggling to translate something, we could all just switch into English. We could ask our teacher questions in English. Whereas in this case, I had to use the French words I know to communicate. If I didn't know how to say something, I would look it up on the spot to be able to say it. And that actually helped me a lot because it put me in a position where I really had no other choice. She wasn't going to understand me if I said anything in English. And so then that furthered that language development as I was learning at a much faster rate. And the same thing in my classes as well. Like my French professors also didn't really speak English. The classes I took were with international students, all of whom were learning French, but people were from all over the world. So even in the class, maybe some people spoke English, but we didn't have that common language either. So I was in all these settings where I had to use French and didn't really have a backup option or another choice. And so after that first month, then it got a lot easier. Once I was just getting used to the rhythm of the language, using it every single day, studying it for a couple of hours, talking in it at home, like over dinner, with my host family. And then once I think my mind just kind of got used to that, then I would say it got better. And there were still times where I had communication issues, said the wrong thing, didn't understand what somebody else was saying to me. But once like you kind of get over that initial like speed bump, maybe you could say, it does get easier, and the full immersion really helps.
You wasted little to no time, I feel like, after graduating from
Uh-huh.
college to apply for. I mean, that's what I got out of just like learning more about you. Like you kind of hit the ground running
Yeah.
upon graduating. to find a role in another country.
Hmm.
Please
It
correct
was
me if I'm wrong.
no, I once senior year came around and it got to the point where everybody was starting to look for jobs and think about post graduation plans. I knew that I wanted to go back abroad in some capacity. And so it was, I think like the fall of my senior year was really when I started looking, talking to some people at my school, using like some of the campus resources, doing online searches, and just trying to see what the options were for me and kind of what jobs I could have, where I could go. So that process actually took place really over my whole senior year. And then I think I got my first job in Morocco maybe in like April. So before I graduated, I'd signed the contract. I knew I was moving. I had maybe like a month in the US after graduation to just kind of move out, wrap things up, finalize like those, I guess, the abroad plans, get a ticket, all of that. And I actually ended up spending about 2 months in Europe before moving to Morocco. My contract didn't start until I believe October, but I'd graduated in May, and one of my best friends, who was also graduating that year, she and I had been talking about traveling together for a long time. And so we found this site called Workaway. And it's basically just a website that is used to connect hosts with travelers all over the world. So they have positions in, I think, almost every single country. And people in that country can post if they're looking for like either a volunteer or a part-time employee, and then travelers can search in the countries they want to go to or for positions they're looking for to find hosts. The idea is that it's really only part-time, like 20, 25 hours a week. You're always volunteering, at least in exchange for room and board. Sometimes you get a small stipend on top of that, but it's a way to be able to travel on more of a budget and explore like that local culture where you are. So there's a wide variety of options on there. My friend and I ended up working at a mountain hostel in a town called Zakopane, which is in like the south of Poland. And so
Oh,
we were just kind of like part-time hostel receptionists, working a couple days a week, and then we had that rest of the week to just explore, go hiking, travel a bit around Poland and in some of the neighboring countries as well. And so we did that for 2 months. And then from there, that's when I went to Morocco and started that job.
okay, gems. I love that. Okay. That was definitely a good gem. I Okay, I'll keep that in mind for myself. Okay.
Yeah, I can send you the link to the website. It's a great resource. Makes it a lot more affordable to still be able to travel and have that experience without having to spend money, constantly on like accommodation, on food, on all of those other expenses.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Overall, would you say that that's a good like that you had a good experience with that program?
Yeah, I loved it. It was honestly like two of the best months of my life. And we were making maybe like 25 US dollars a week, sleeping and eating for free, but basically making no money, didn't have jobs at that time, had just graduated. And so uh, I think taking those circumstances, a lot of people just thought that I was a little bit crazy for doing what I was doing. But it was so much fun. I got to spend that summer with one of my best friends. We made so many other new friends just with other volunteers at the hostel, other guests coming out and in and out of the hostel. And we got to spend so much time outside as well, going hiking every week. Like the mountains were literally right across the street from the hostel we were at. And so we got to hike, got to explore, just got to be somewhere new and kind of have this post graduation adventure. So I would highly recommend it. The positions vary, the countries vary, but you can always talk to hosts before committing to something. You can read other volunteers' reviews as well to make sure that it's like a good setup, that other people have had a positive experience there before committing.
Okay. Okay. Good stuff. Yay. Thank you. All right. So we want to speak a little bit more about you now and
Hmm.
just how your experience has been in Morocco, and expectations that you had
Yeah.
for being there. I mean, what were your expectations upon arriving to Morocco. And actually, have you ever been to Morocco prior to moving there or
No.
no? Okay.
I just kind of transplanted myself and said, let's hope this works out. And it did.
Okay, yeah. So definitely tell us like what were you expecting from this experience and were those expectations even met?
Yeah, I would say I didn't have a lot of expectations going in. My goal in looking for jobs abroad was really just to experience somewhere new, to try to have a similar experience to what I had in France in discovering and really like immersing myself in a new culture. And I think one of my biggest takeaways from France is how different it is to really live in a place versus to just visit it, and how much I felt like I got from that experience of living in it and really living almost a local life to as much as you can do that as a foreigner. But understanding the cultural norms, the way that people interact with each other, just kind of the way the society is set up. And so that is, I guess, what I wanted to get out of my experience abroad. I was not very particular in terms of where I went. I was kind of looking at positions anywhere, just seeing what I could find, what my options were. I didn't start with Morocco in mind specifically. My search was pretty open, but I think the more I narrowed it down, the more things that I applied to, or I guess the more I searched, I found a couple positions in Morocco, and then I didn't know anything about Morocco, so I researched it a little bit. I knew a couple people who had studied abroad here before, and so talked to them. They had really good things to say, and so then it kind of started, I guess, narrowing in a bit. And so when I got the job, I would say I did not put a lot of thought into accepting it. I was just kind of like, you know what, this sounds cool. I've never been before. Let's see what happens. And a part of that is just I'm a very spontaneous person. I am not a big planner. I don't take a lot of time to like really plan or think out decisions, which has its pros and cons. In this case, I would say it worked out pretty well. It was easy for me almost to just take that leap of faith and say, we'll do this. My initial contract was just for a year. I figured if I didn't like it, could leave after then, even if I liked it, but I just wanted to try something else after. I was only committing to a year in the beginning. And so I think going in with that mindset made it feel a little less permanent. In that a year can be a long time, but it can also be a pretty short time in like the relative span of things. And I figured that would be a good amount of time to allow me to kind of get used to the country, see what the way of life was, see if it felt like somewhere I wanted to stay or not. And that is just the mindset I went in with. And there wasn't a lot of additional like thought or expectations behind my decision. I tried to go in as open as possible, just to see what would happen, to try to be open and to be flexible, like to that experience and to that way of life.
You're a bold. That's a very bold move. Like the way in which you did it was just very, very bold. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I don't know. You mentioned offline like you listened a bit to my episode and how I mean I am such a planner at heart and it scares me a little to be spontaneous. Maybe I don't know if you have an article about that, but please help the folks who are planners at heart, like
I can write one.
when it comes to stuff like this because it scares me. And
Yeah.
I took years to prepare for my move to Texas and I wanted a job lined up before I went, and
Mhm.
it just didn't work out for me, and I just kind of said, "Bump that. I'm still gonna make this leap, and I'll figure
Mhm.
it out when I get there." But
Yeah.
you, like the way in which you relocated, because I had opportunities to see to see Houston before I moved, and you like you just went to Morocco, not knowing like what what was in store? Like, how are the people there? How's like value of like not value, but just like how um, people navigate life and how that differs from the US, like an individual lifestyle versus like, is it a communal lifestyle? Like
Mhm.
you did the research, you learned a bit, but like you didn't see it for yourself until you
Mhm.
moved there. Bold, I say. Bold you are. Oh my gosh. And you mentioned even when you were in Poland and
Mhm.
certain people thought that maybe this was like a very wild idea to
Uh-huh.
to like even like do even after graduating from college. I mean, who was it family who kind of mentioned that to you? Was it like certain friends or professors in your ear saying, "Hey, like this is a little wild. Just got your degree. Hold up, like this is crazy." Who was in your ear?
I would say it was more like acquaintances, maybe people in, like, I would say that second circle. I feel very lucky in that my parents were super supportive of my decision to move. They, I think, were not actually that surprised. Just kind of knowing me and knowing that I have a very independent nature, I don't think either one of them were surprised when I announced that, I'm looking for jobs abroad and I got a job in Morocco and that's where I'm going. So that was really nice that they both just had a supportive reaction. They didn't try to control me, didn't try to stop me. Same with close friends as well. Like my close friends were definitely very understanding. But yeah, I'd say people that's kind of in that like second layer of like people I know, but maybe that I'm not super close to, or like family, friends, yeah, just people who knew what I was doing but didn't know me well enough to understand that decision. Or I think the one of the comments that I get a lot or that people make in reference to me a lot is that this is something I'm doing to like get it out of my system. That I'm doing this while I'm young and I just need to like go travel a bit and then I'm gonna move back and settle down. And it's always hard to explain that idea of like this isn't a temporary thing, and that doesn't mean I'm going to be in Morocco forever. I might not be abroad forever, but it's an experience that I've really loved. The longer that I've done it, the more certain I've become that this is something I want to keep doing. And I think there's just that expectation that there is one way of life that, maybe you travel a bit when you're young and then you settle down, you get married, you start a family, maybe you have a more traditional job. And I just don't feel like I fit into that role. I don't feel like that's what I want. And there's no shade for people who, do choose that life. But it's just that idea that you're supposed to fit into that one mold and I don't fit into that. And so I think that's where I've kind of faced some resistance, of people wondering, what am I doing? Especially the longer I stay. And there are still those questions of like, when are you going to come back? When is your time going to be done? Even kind of just like, why are you still in Morocco? And so that's been the harder part to try to explain to people of like, this is my life now here. Like I have a life, I have a community. It would be hard to just suddenly uproot that and move back.
This is a great opportunity to address the critics because
Uh-huh.
I mean honestly like you're kind of living the life I wish I would have had coming out of college and even when I was in college and I wanted to study abroad and my mom was not supportive of that and I even went as far as to apply for the Peace Corps and I landed an opportunity in Peru. And even
Wow.
then, I didn't even do that because, I mean, there's a lot of criticism just
Yeah,
in my ear.
hard.
And like now I'm like 35, like, and I still wish I would have made that trip. I wish I would have
Mhm.
left and went to Peru. And it's like a feeling that kind of haunts me to this day. And so
Yeah.
I do hope, yeah, I do hope that, to people who are kind of in your ear a little bit, I hope they listen to this because, if you're not paying Laura's bills, you're definitely not paying her bills. Like, you're not, like, how are you adding value to, like, Laura's life to influence her to make that decision to move back to the US? Like,
Uh-huh.
you're not really doing it. So let Laura live her life. If she doesn't want to have kids right now, if she wants to really just live this experience out, she's been there in Morocco for 5 years. Come on now, like, let Laura live. Let her let her. She's a full adult. Let her live her life the way that she sees fit. And
And I am lucky that it's not the people closest to me that I'm getting this from. I think it would have made my experience a lot harder if my parents had been putting that pressure on me, or like if my closest friends had, but I think they knew me well enough to know this was something I really wanted to do. And that when I really want to do something, I can't really be stopped from it either. Like if I have my mind on something, that is usually the direction that I end up going in. But I mean, the people that like whose opinions I think matter the most were also the most supportive. And so I feel very lucky to like have had that support from my inner circle in terms of people respecting and just understanding that decision.
yeah, I wish more people could have that experience. And I mean, even if you're listening right now, you don't, like I said, are they paying your bills?
Yeah.
Like, how are they adding value to the life that you want to live? And if you can't answer that question in a positive way, then maybe you just need to go ahead and do your own thing. Make that leap. Make
And
it
it's
happen.
never too
Do what,
late. Like I would say,
yeah.
I think it was almost easier for me to do at such a young age because I just graduated. I didn't, I mean, I could have gotten a job in the US, I could have had another plan, but that life that I had on campus in Colorado was over and I couldn't stay on campus. I didn't really want to move back home. I didn't feel like that was the right step for me. My friends were all leaving campus as well and going back in different directions, getting jobs, moving in different parts of the country. So I think it helped that there wasn't like one place where I felt like my whole community was, just in the nature of the way that that happens, with like with college, with undergraduate programs, when it's done, people do tend to move in different directions. So that helped that I wasn't really uprooting anything because it was going to be a transition no matter what I did. And so I just kind of transitioned into life abroad. I think it probably would be a lot harder if I did this, right now, if I did this a few years from now, once I maybe was more settled or did have more of a community. But at the same time, I would say it's never too late. Like, even if it's hard, if there is anyone listening who feels like that's a step they want to take or they wish they hadn't done it when they were younger, it's not too late to still go for it and still like have that opportunity.
Right. Oh, that's a good point, because I just did a episode with a lady who she moved in her 40s. Like, she
Wow.
left, she took a daughter with her. Her daughter was like, it's not for me. I mean, she's like, her daughter was in her like late teens anyway, so she
Okay.
moved back to the US. But I mean, mama, freshly divorced, ready to go. Like, and lived in multiple countries and multiple
Wow.
continents, and she's still, doing her thing and traveling and telling the world about it. So
That's awesome.
never too late. Never
Yeah.
too late. Yes. So, um, you know what? I This was not a question that I had in mind until this now, but
Mhm.
we're kind of talking about college, and now that I'm thinking about my experience and why another reason I didn't go to Peru. Um, Student loans kind of burdened me a bit. I don't know if that was the same for you, as far as like, you having your college experience, whether you did accumulate student loans. Um, was that a thing for you at all?
No, I was very fortunate to not have student loans, to not have that burden in going abroad or just in that influencing my decisions post graduation. So that very much is a privilege I know not everybody has, especially in terms
Yeah.
of moving like to another country and depending on the cost of living, the salary in that country.
Okay. Okay. I might have to make a mental note and stick a pin in that, and maybe I'll bring it up in the future. But um, Yeah. Don't let student loans get you in the way. Don't let it do that. Still do your thing. Don't be like me. I could have left, but like in my early days, I was like, who's going to take care of my student loans?
Mm,
Because the Peace Corps was only providing enough for me to just like exist in Peru.
yeah.
Like that was it. And I still wish I would have made that leap and said middle fingers to student loans. But
But
yeah.
I know it's a real,
Um
like, that's a real factor to consider as well. Like, there are other programs like the Peace Corps that don't provide maybe a full living stipend, or just maybe just give you enough, but not enough that you'd have that extra money each month to make payments towards loans. So,
yeah.
in terms of looking at that, like, I know that is a factor that definitely can feel like it's holding people back. And my advice in that case would be look at countries that have higher average salaries or higher cost of living than the US, where like the salary is going to match that, so that even if you are living somewhere else, working in a different place, you're making enough money, that you feel like you can reasonably have enough each month to put towards those payments.
It's a very valid point. Okay. Thank you, Laura. You teaching me something today. All right. Gonna redirect this back to you because what was the year that you moved to Morocco?
2019.
2019. Okay, so pre-pandemic.
It was nice for the first 6 months until COVID hit.
Oh, dang.
And yeah, then I was just in lockdown in another place.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so how was that experience for you?
That was definitely difficult. I think just nobody knew what was happening. There were no answers, no ways to predict, what was going to happen in this pandemic, given that, nobody had ever really lived through a pandemic of that scale before. Um, and so I remember in the beginning, it was just super stressful of not knowing like what the next day was going to bring. Morocco shut down pretty quickly, like in a very short span, maybe like 2, 3 days. It was like one day, I think like restaurants and kind of non essential stores started closing down. And then they stopped allowing travel between cities, and then they closed like the airspace. And so it was almost like we just like you're reading the news, you're kind of starting to hear about this virus, and then suddenly it's just like one thing after another. And there were some emergency like US embassy flights from Morocco back to the US that US citizens were allowed to take, but they were super expensive. Like I think it was something like $1,200 one way, maybe even more. And I was kind of like, I don't really see the point in going back, because what am I going to do? Like, be in lockdown at home without a job, whereas I still had my job in Morocco. I was teaching at that time, and so the school I was at just went to being online. But I still had that stability of knowing, like, okay, the school's not going to shut down. Like, I'm not going to be let go. We'll just do online classes for a bit, and then that felt more stable than I know like some other jobs were during COVID times. So I decided to stay. It was a pretty intense lockdown. Like, it was about 2, 3 months in there where really I did not leave my home. I was living with a roommate at that time, and so we just kind of hung out with each other. Went out to like get groceries. That was about it, and then just spent a lot of time at home working a bit. I watched all seasons of Game of Thrones in like 1 month. Read a lot of books. Just tried to entertain myself in whatever ways I could. And so that was definitely hard. But at the same time, I felt like it wouldn't have been any better if I were back in the US, because I would have been back in the US and then without a job, which wouldn't have really been a great situation either. So looking back on it, I'm definitely glad that I stayed. I think Morocco handled the whole COVID situation a bit better than the US did, just in terms of regulations and in terms of enforcing them a bit more. And so then once the lockdown lifted, there was still some of those COVID restrictions in terms of like masking in public spaces and social distancing a bit more, and some public spaces still being closed. But there was never a second lockdown. So once that first lockdown was lifted, which I think was maybe like May or June 2020, things started to feel more normal, even if it wasn't 100% back to normal. It at least felt like, okay, we're kind of regaining some sense of normalcy, even if you still feel like there's a pandemic happening in the way in which you see people interact or the way in which like certain public spaces are structured. At least there was like freedom to kind of be able to go out again and just feel less confined. So after those first 3 months, that I definitely felt good about my decision to stay.
Ooh, I held my breath a little bit. It's kind of thinking about like you're in a new place. You're just trying to gain your bearings. You're
Mhm.
also trying to, I think, learn a new language because I mean, don't they speak French a little bit in
Yeah,
Morocco? But I mean,
French,
that's not like the main language.
Arabic is the main language. So I was trying to learn like the Moroccan dialect of Arabic. Though I wasn't really using it much during the pandemic since I was just inside.
Okay. Oof. You're learning cultural norms that I'm sure in some ways are drastically different from
Yeah,
the US.
yeah.
Um, oh my gosh. Wow. How are you? I had so many questions. Just like trying to navigate. Overall though, you said that eventually things started feeling normal. How would you say your first year or two, like how was that for you? Like after like the normalcy started like sinking in.
I would say that sense of community was very present like from the beginning. So like those first 6 months I had pre-pandemic were great. I was, getting used to living in a new place, traveling quite a bit around Morocco. It was that feeling that I've been looking for of like constantly experiencing something new, learning new things every day. That feeling of like growth and discovery. So that was very much present in those initial 6 months. I think the pandemic was a bit harder. Just, I mean, in the lockdown, it was just my roommate. Like I was just in that apartment with my roommate, and that was kind of it. We weren't really interacting with many other people given the restrictions. So those months are a bit strange because it doesn't even really feel like I was in Morocco. It just kind of felt like I was at home, like everybody else in the world was at home. I wasn't getting that same cultural experience or like language practice just because of the lack of interaction. So it's kind of hard to categorize those months. Even a little bit after the lockdown ended, like things were still pretty quiet. I ended up being able to go back home maybe in like August of that year. The airspace reopened, and so I ended up going back home. It was the first time I'd been back in about a year, but I was able to at least like see my family. Wasn't able to see everybody I wanted to see, just given the fact that I had friends and family in different places across the U.S., but was able to just spend that time at home. Um, but honestly, I would say that second year in Morocco was almost harder. Like, I don't, part of it might have been kind of post pandemic effects, just in terms of there were still like some restrictions in place, still some social distancing happening. Part of it might also have just been, so I was still teaching at that time. I liked teaching, but I didn't love it. And I think I realized that pretty quickly that it was a good first job to have and a good experience, but not the long term job that I wanted. And so I was in my second year of that and trying to make the most of it, but not really enjoying it, not quite having that feeling I wanted to of, really like liking my job and wanting to go to work, which I know is not possible to have all the time. But I did kind of know that something was missing in that category. And I wasn't really meeting new people or making a lot of new friends. And so I had some friends with like some of the other teachers at work, maybe met a couple people outside of that, but I didn't feel like I had a strong social circle. So that second year was actually pretty difficult. Like in that year, I felt almost more lonely, more isolated, I would say. And I had been in touch with this travel company in Casablanca. I'd actually applied for a job with them and had been accepted, but like the week that the lockdown started. And so then we'd stayed in touch, but they were kind of like, our business is reliant on travel and people aren't really traveling right now. So it's hard for us to say like what the next few months will bring. And so I decided to just keep my teaching job and stay in contact with them and see what happened. And so then in between kind of like fall 2020, spring 2021, that's when I was just still teaching, but was definitely just feeling a bit more isolated, not really feeling like I was having the experience I wanted. But I ended up reaching back out to that company. Things were starting to look up a bit for them. I think we were kind of starting to see that light at the end of the tunnel of like, pandemic isn't going to last forever. And so then they agreed to take me on starting that fall. And so that was actually, I think, a very good timing because otherwise I might have ended up leaving Morocco sooner. Like I just was kind of lost, didn't really have that sense of direction. But that job opened up a lot for me. It allowed me to move to Casablanca, where I am right now. And so even in that, like it was a smaller relocation, I guess, just a couple of hours away. But that I think then kind of reignited some of those same feelings I had of discovering something new, kind of being back, being immersed in the culture. It was much easier for me, I think, to meet people here and to make new friends. And so then that sense of like having a community again, forming those connections started to redevelop in a way they hadn't in like those more pandemic months.
Okay. Okay. I'm glad that you were able to gain your bearings.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And also kudos to you because you made that move by yourself. Now, granted, COVID kind of played a huge role in like the what you mentioned earlier about loneliness, just kind of
Mhm.
like being in solitude more than you would have liked to. Yeah, that's it's not really publicized or mentioned a lot how there's that aspect was there for you and probably a lot of people who really haven't like put it out there like yes there's this feeling of loneliness.
Mhm.
I think that's normal in a sense, but then it was kind of heightened a bit for you due to the pandemic. um but yeah, that was in all of that happened, that wasn't even in Casablanca, that was in another city where you
Yeah.
experienced that.
So that was in Meknes. Meknes is a city that's about 3 hours away from Casablanca, a little more like central Morocco. And so that's where I lived my first 2 years, where I got my initial teaching job. So I was there for 2 years. And then in the fall of 2021 is when I relocated to Casablanca.
Okay. Okay. um I want to touch bases on something else.
Hmm.
Um, you mentioned, I have to read this 'cause when I asked, like, what was your greatest takeaway from just being in Morocco in general, you mentioned that there's a strong sense of connection and
Hmm.
community. It's drastically different from the US. You know, the US is more of like me.
Yeah.
Kind of like that individualistic mentality versus being in Morocco. Um, can you speak to that? Like how you were able to establish community and how it changed your views on life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I mean, I think it's obvious, even for people who are just visiting Morocco, if you've been in the country for like a day or two, I think you can generally feel just like that warmth of people being hospitable, being open, and wanting to talk to you and like wanting to help you. And I felt that almost immediately from when I arrived, just like how warm and how welcoming people were. And I think you could feel that it goes beyond just a surface level. Like it feels very genuine. And when I got to McNess, the school that I was working at was super helpful in just getting like a place for us set up. And so one of my coworkers at the time basically took us around, like myself and a couple of other American teachers, and showed us different apartments, helped us find an apartment, negotiated to make sure that we were getting like a fair price for rent, and then took us to the Medina, which is like the name for kind of the old cities in Morocco where the marketplaces are, and helped us pick out furniture, um, like get appliances, kind of just show us the ropes. And so that initial, just all of that assistance like felt so welcoming to have someone that was there that was taking their time to like do these things to help us get accustomed, I think made a really big difference. And then in just moving into that first apartment building, like how kind our neighbors were, bringing over food, offering to give us things, like immediately inviting us over for tea, which is really big in Morocco. Like there's a huge culture around drinking tea, or inviting us for lunch. And it was something that like in the US, I think people can be nice and people can be friendly. And it's not to say that everyone in the US is individualistic, but it was a very different feeling and experience, like from anywhere I'd lived in the US, and how willing people were to just kind of jump in, recognize like, okay, you're a foreigner here, it's your first time here, you don't really like know anyone, you don't know anything. It's like, let me help you. And that made that transition easier because it felt like I always had somebody that I could ask if I needed something. Or even just that feeling of like, going to someone's house, being invited into someone else's home to share a meal, to talk, to get to know each other a bit, also makes that transition feel better because you feel less alone. Like even if you're in a new place and in a new culture, you kind of have that immediate connection. And so I think I had so many of those moments during like my first week, my first month in Morocco, that made me feel like this is something that I actually really love having, and like this experience of feeling like I'm part of a community, in a way that maybe I'd felt to a certain extent in the US, but like never quite to that level. And I think another component is that it doesn't feel transactional. It doesn't feel like
Mm,
someone's doing you a favor because then they expect you to do a favor back for them.
yeah.
And that's something that I think is maybe more common in the US. Like you feel like maybe someone helps you out, but then you feel like you owe them something. And it's something that I still struggle with internally, of feeling like there are people that have done a lot for me that I know that I haven't done that same like extent back for them. But I also don't feel like they expect it. It doesn't feel like, yeah, I guess just transactional is the best word I can use to describe that. Um, and so then I think in just having those experiences that felt very genuine, it's like I'm just going to help you because I want to help you. I don't need anything in return. Made me start to think about community and about relationships in a different way. And even just like, I think it's very common for people to like give things that they don't need to somebody else without like, oh, I'm gonna, sell you this, or I'm getting rid of these clothes. Like, does anyone want to come buy them off of me? It's just kind of like, oh, you know, I have these clothes I don't want. They're your size. Like, do you want them? That kind of just like giving where there's not a price attached to it. There's not that idea of like, let's constantly put a value on these things. And so having those experiences like in my social circle, in my relationships, made me then kind of go back and think about like the way in which I think about money, or I think about doing favors for people, and how that has also like begun to shift within myself.
Communicating with people in, not like all people in the US, but I think it matters too, like where exactly in the US you are. Like I was just reading about like your experience, and it reminded me a lot of where I came from, where
Mm.
like it was very communal, at least for me growing up. And like some of my takeaways from your experience is just like times is just slow. Like time just slows down because you're not constantly like looking for, you're not in a rush for much. You're not spending so much time trying to um I guess survive in a way. Like you have other people to lean on, that kind of help, in a way to, it slows down time. Like you
Mhm.
can allocate more time doing things for yourself because you have a group of people supporting you, but also um, like certain things that we do here, it kind of adds like that element of I'm in a rush. Let me do this one thing, like something
Yeah.
that seems simple, like drying clothes, putting clothes in the dryer,
Mm.
because it's going to dry your clothes a lot quicker versus hanging them outside, which is what my folks did for a very long time. I didn't even know there was such thing as a dryer until like maybe when I was a teenager.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I think it's great that you have like that experience. Like that's how people actually live in
Yeah.
Morocco. And I was hoping you can kind of speak on how the concept of time transformed for you, and how that relates to the ways in which Morocco's promoting sustainability.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on a lot of it in what you said about how we're kind of always in a rush in the US. And the longer I've spent away from the US, the more I feel this difference when I go back, that you almost just feel a little more stressed sometimes, like being in that environment, feeling maybe that secondhand like stress of people around you, just kind of that pace of like go, go, go. And I think in somewhere like Morocco, and honestly, I think in a lot of places outside of the US, uh, there's just less, maybe less of a rush to do things, less pressure, kind of that feeling of like everything will work out, just might not be exactly in the specific time frame that you think it will. But I think here people in general just seem more relaxed. Even in like when you walk down the streets, you'll see people having coffee together, having tea together, like sitting over meals, chatting, or even just like maybe sitting alone, people watching. But you feel like a sense of calmness, I would say. Maybe not quite as much in Casablanca because Casablanca is a very big city and there definitely is a lot happening here. Like things are kind of always moving. It has that big city energy. Um, but at the same time, I think people know how to just enjoy life a bit more. Like lunch breaks are longer, times to eat meals together are longer. There's not that like, let me just grab something to go and like eat it while I'm walking or eat it on my commute. Like people actually sit and like have communal meals together and take that time in a way that is different. And so I think just in those components that are part of everyday life, in the way in which people like eat or interact with one another or just take the time to maybe like sit back and enjoy something, it makes all of those activities more enjoyable. Like you can enjoy your coffee if you're like sitting and slowly sipping it versus, trying to chug it down on your way to work. And of course, that's not always possible. Like people still have to go places, people still, have work, have schedules, have places that they need to be. But I think in general, that pace of life is slower in a way that's really refreshing, especially for someone like me that is coming from a culture where it is very different. And I'm naturally like a very slow person, which is kind of a running joke. And people that know me, like I'm always late. Takes me a long time to get ready in the morning. I'm a slow eater. I enjoy a good slow morning. I'm not like a get up in the morning and go. And that fits in like perfectly with Morocco, where things are not always running like maybe on time. Or if I'm having people over for dinner and I say 8:30, everybody's probably there by 9:30. It's not like a 8:30 sharp. Everybody's ringing the door. Like in that way, I think time just moves a bit differently. But in a way that once you get used to it and once you understand that that's just kind of how it is, it does feel very nice. It's a part of my lifestyle that I do really enjoy.
And you know what? For the people who are listening, I brought up or mentioned the dryer and clothesline,
Uh-huh.
because of a recent article that Laura is featured in, which you can check out on her social media.
Yeah.
Connect with her on our Instagram and other social media platforms so you can stay in the know about what I was referring to, plus more. Um, I really like what you mentioned in one of your one of the articles Business Week. I'm just going to throw that out there. That you were featured in about just being able to walk and not so much like being reliant on vehicles. Just the fact that you do that, it screams like, oh, so it's safe here. As far as like being able to do that, like it's safe for.
Yeah.
I have my days, where I just honestly, if I wasn't living in Austin, I don't know if I could see myself doing that.
Hmm.
Just casually walking to certain places, like just that, not that safe for me. Like in my mind, I just don't think it's like very safe. Like I need like more people around me to be that comfortable
Right.
to be able to do that. Um, I'm I'm guessing that when you do have like these like moments where you need to go grab some food or a snack or maybe some coffee, like you're doing this by yourself. Um, so overall, do you feel safe where you are?
Yeah, 100%. And I get this
Okay.
question a lot, kind of going back to like the questions we talked about earlier, people questioning like what I'm doing, why I'm here, why I'm continuing to stay abroad. I get a lot of questions about safety and about especially like being here as a woman. And it's a valid question. Like I understand that there is that fear of the unknown of, what it's like to be a woman who lives alone, who travels alone. And I've lived alone for the past, I think about the past 3 years now. So, um, have my own apartment. I have like a good community, good friends here, but don't have family here, not like from here in the same way. So I get the question a lot. And I think, I mean, one, I will say safety is relative. Of course, it depends on the individual person. I don't want to negate other people's experiences of being unsafe, but I am always a little surprised when I see people online. Maybe sometimes it's like an influencer that's been in Morocco for a week and they say, like, oh, you really shouldn't travel here alone as a woman. And it always is a bit frustrating to see that because I think it is misrepresenting Morocco and misrepresenting like what you can actually do here. Um, I will say street harassment is common, especially when you look obviously foreign, as I do. Nobody thinks I'm Moroccan, do not look Moroccan. And so I do get attention when I'm out walking. People notice me. People often can guess that I'm American or sometimes maybe think I'm European, but it is obvious I'm not from there. And I think that is unfortunately just a common part of life here and that people are likely to call out to you. Though I will say, as annoying as it can be, it's not dangerous. It's normally just people saying things like, hi, welcome to Morocco. How are you today? Sometimes people just try to give you directions like to the maybe more common like touristy sites. So I get that sometimes like somebody telling me where a popular tourist site is, even if I'm not asking for it. So I think of it as like the way that I describe it is it's almost kind of like you're just like you're swatting flies. It's annoying. Sometimes you're just kind of like, stop talking to me, stop calling out at me. But it's also never really made me feel unsafe. There are, a few instances where I've definitely been uncomfortable, a handful of times in the few years here where I've been unsafe, but that's definitely not a regular feeling that I experience. And so it is a hurdle to get past, I think, of just that, like, people talking to you, people noticing you. But for every like one person that maybe does bother me a little bit, there are 10 people that I know would be willing to help me if I needed something. And so that is kind of always the mindset that I try to have of like, I know that I can likely go in a shop and ask the shop owner, even just say like, hey, like if there's someone on the street that's bothering me, or even if I just need directions to something, whatever, need to borrow a phone, anything like that. I know that the majority of people I ask would be willing to help. Again, kind of like what I said earlier, without expecting anything in return. So I think there is that very much that sense of security, and that like most people are kind and are welcoming and are good people. And even if there is that occasional like annoying harassment or someone that is bothering you in public, that doesn't take up enough space that it makes me feel unsafe here. And like I've been in my current apartment for about a year and a half. And so now in this neighborhood, I know people in the neighborhood, people know me. Like the owners of like the local shops in the neighborhood, people that I like go to for various services. There are a ton of like little local stores and things around me. And so I know all of those people, and there are people that like work and live in the neighborhood that we recognize each other, neighbors in my building. So that actually creates, I think, a very strong sense of security in that people recognize me, I recognize other people. I know where I am. I know the space around me. Even if somebody does bother me, I know that I could go tell any of those people or like ask for help, and I feel like they would help me.
Oh,
And I know that that's maybe something that's harder to achieve in like a shorter time scale. If someone is just traveling through Morocco for a week and feels like it's unsafe. But again, it does not compare to like feelings I've had in the US of being catcalled, where that actually like has given me real fear before. Or there's that question of, like, if somebody's bothering me, like, do they have a gun on them? If I react, if I say something back, like you just don't know what's going to happen in the US. And I think on a level that is much scarier than it is in Morocco. And so it was a long-winded answer, but that is kind of my perspective on it. In general, I would say it is a very safe country, especially because of that communal nature and because of the ways in which people are willing to help strangers and like to go out of their way to do something for somebody, even if they don't know them.
yeah. Do you feel that the experience that you had or have, um, as far as like that safety component, do you feel that um, that can be applied no matter who you are or like what type of background you have, or are there certain reservations that people may have? If like for instance, like I'm not chocolate, but I like like I've never been to Morocco, so I
Yeah.
don't know if like, how I would be perceived, or like
Yeah.
whether I would get that same sense of community, or um whether that's just kind of reserved to certain sets of people. I
Hmm.
don't know. I love people regardless. I don't care where you came from, but I don't know if people feel the same way about, you know, me or people from like other backgrounds.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And everything I just said, I do say from a position of a lot of privilege in that, like, I'm white, I'm straight. Besides being a woman, I don't really fall into any like marginalized categories, and so I have a ton of privilege because of that, and because of just being American, and I think with the general like power that American citizenship and American passport gives you. So I can't apply my experience to everybody. I will say in terms of like visiting Morocco, I would say yes. That experience is probably relatively similar, even if not exactly the same. I know that there are, for example, like LGBTQ travelers who may have questions about coming to Morocco and if it's safe. And it I understand like that is very much a risk and something to think about if you are LGBTQ, of like where you're traveling and are they welcoming, are they inclusive? I would say in Morocco, generally fine as long as you avoid PDA, but that is also the recommendation that I would tell straight friends as well who are coming, just because in like a Muslim country, that is generally considered pretty disrespectful. So that's advice I give across the board to any couple, to not like be very touchy in public, because you just don't see that here. But other than that, like it is a safe place for LGBTQ travelers to visit. To live, I don't know if I could recommend it quite as highly, just given that it's not 100% accepted in Moroccan culture. And then, for other travelers who are maybe Black or of Asian descent or of other races, I think you are likely to get comments on maybe your appearance, on your skin color, which I know can be like frustrating to hear when people are just like, making kind of comments that they might think are offhand, but that could actually bother you. And I know that I've had friends who are maybe American, but who are not white, and so not as easily identified as being American, who have experienced that in Morocco. But I would say it's not, not to the extent that it's not worth coming either. I think it's something to think about more if you're considering like actually relocating, moving somewhere full time, thinking about like, will my identity be accepted in this place? But in terms of visiting, like the expectation I would set is be prepared. People definitely might make comments about your race or about how you look um, in a way that I know could bother some people. And at the same time, I think you're still likely to have those positive experiences with other people. Like, no, it's not like every single person someone will interact with is going to treat them in that way.
Okay. Learn something new today. All right. Um, I lied. I have one more question. And I
Uh-huh.
promise this is the last question because this is a question I ask everybody. And um, I want you to think about the version of Laura that was in Colorado,
Hmm.
um, like senior year Laura, based on your experience and what you know now, what words of advice would you give to senior year Laura,
Hmm.
2018, 19?
Yeah, 18, 19.
Yeah. Yeah. What words of advice would you give that version of yourself?
I think that version of myself was not really doubting my decision. Like I don't think I had a lot of like reservations about doing what I was doing, but I would still probably say to her, like trust the process. Trust that like this is something that you want, that you're taking this leap of faith for a reason, regardless of what questions other people have, or any kind of criticisms or judgments you might face from other people. Like it is still something that's worth it, and something that will end up being like very rewarding in unexpected ways. I don't think myself 5 years ago would have necessarily thought that I'd still be in Morocco. I don't know if I could have told you where I would have been, but I think I didn't think of this experience as like, or didn't think of maybe my initial job in Morocco turning into the 5 years that it has been. But that's just kind of the way that it's fallen, and the feelings that I've had here in terms of like really beginning to feel more connected and forming that community and wanting to keep staying. And so I think, yeah, just trust that process. That kind of like, as cliche as it might sound, I do generally believe that everything works out for a reason, everything happens for a reason. And I think everything that has happened up to this point has led me to where I am now.
That was very insightful. Gosh, thank you so much, Laura.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate you. Oh my gosh, for just sharing your experience, your story with us. Um, I am going to definitely make sure that I highlight everything that I can about you in the description of this episode so people can stay in touch. Because I'm sure people gonna have questions beyond this
Yeah.
episode. And for now, I just want people to kind of more so understand like what um you you've gone through and what led you to this point,
Hmm.
versus so much of like, how is life in Morocco? Would you recommend it? All that stuff. Like I think
Hmm.
that there's a space for that, but I wanted to know mentally, like, are you okay? Are you doing well? Um, how's this experience been for you?
Yeah.
Like, and you shared like your highs and your lows, and for that, I'm grateful, and I definitely have gained a lot of just insight in general about moving. I mean, I feel like no matter if you are moving to another country or you're moving within like the states or within like I guess the country in which you reside, wherever you're listening, um, the lessons and just what people have endured, like there's a commonality, like there's a pattern that I'm seeing like everyone is kind of like going through the same thing, but just in different places. And I think that's wild to me.
Uh-huh.
um, I mean, there may be like a few like differences, like depending on who you are and like what you may like look like. That might be the only
Mhm.
difference. But um, so many people, they're having like their moments of loneliness. So many people are finding community or needing community in order to like feel like they can go throughout day like as a normal person. Like it
Mhm.
trying to just settle, understanding like the norms, like a lot of people are trying to overcome obstacles. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I really appreciate you sharing like how you were able to overcome those obstacles, and I can't wait for people to hear this story because it's resonating with me, and I feel like it's gonna resonate with a lot of people. So, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the space to talk about it. I think it's been a while since I've really like kind of looked back and reflected on what led me to this point and the 5 years that I've been here. So I appreciate your questions and just that opportunity to like dive into that a bit more.
Yeah. Yay. All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in to this episode of the Relocate Podcast. Make sure you tune in every Wednesday. Every Wednesday, we're going to drop a new story. So, hope you have a lovely day, and I will be back in touch with y'all soon.